Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our information session on SLNC Adapts Grant Opportunity. This is the first information session that I've ever had introducing a grant opportunity, so I'm excited to be able to provide this to you. So just to get things started, I wanted to take a moment and introduce ourselves. My name is Catherine Prince, and I'm the Federal Programs Consultant here at the State Library. I coordinate and manage our state's LSTA program, and I'm joined by my wonderful coworker, Abi Waldrupe, who was so gracious in helping me introduce this, and she manages a grant-funded project implementing digital inclusion work at libraries across the state, and she's our in-house expert on digital inclusion. And so I'm so grateful that she's here today. And so next slide. And so I just want to acknowledge our funder, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. It's through IMLS that we are able to offer LSTA grants, which includes these additional stimulus funding opportunities like SLNC Cares and like SLNC Adapts. Next slide. So I do just want to give a quick recap of how we got here and how we're able to offer this special grant opportunity. So like with the CARES Act, IMLS was included in the American Rescue Plan Act, which is also abbreviated as ARP or ARPA. So you might hear us say ARPA. That is what we mean. And so IMLS was allotted $200 million, of which $178 million went to LSTA programs across the nation. So North Carolina's allotment is around $4.3 million. This almost doubles our annual allotment that we receive from IMLS every year. So this is a big deal. This is kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity. And IMLS has directed that these funds be used to achieve the American Rescue Plan Act's purposes in alignment with the State Library of North Carolina's LSTA 5-year plan, which we have 3 goals. That is the pyramid that is on this slide. And so it's the combination of the American Rescue Plan and the combination of our 5-year plan that is providing the basis for SLNC Adapts. The goals of our 5-year plan are to strengthen capacity, expand access, and community engagement. Next slide. So I just wanted to start out by who is eligible to apply for SLNC Adapts. There are 4 types of libraries in North Carolina that are able to apply, and those are the public libraries that are eligible for the Aid to Public Libraries Fund. This is known across the state as state aid. And so also the libraries that are UNC system schools, libraries at the community colleges, and the NCICU libraries. Next slide. So with SLNC Adapts, we are helping libraries respond directly and immediately to the pandemic for high needs communities and populations that are within our state. This is a big priority for us. Next slide. So when we talk about high needs communities, who are those populations? So these populations can be determined by assessing available economic and broadband data sets. And these indicators that are listed on the screen can be useful, but there may be other indicators that can also support the need within your community. For example, if there's a population, if public transportation isn't available within a portion of your service area, that may be an indicator to demonstrate a high need. So feel free to share other indicators that you might think of within the chat that might help others as they're working on projects, and also help us as we provide guidance to libraries across the state. Next slide. So I wanted to be sure to provide you with data sources for you to access, and these will help you identify the populations and the users that can benefit from these funds. And again, there may be other data sources that you have in your local community. For example, if your library has recently conducted a needs assessment within your community, you may have already identified a high needs community within that document. And again, if you know of other data sources, please feel free to share them. It's a great resource for everybody. Next slide. And so I do just want to talk about our spending priorities. We based our spending priorities in direct alignment with guidance provided from IMLS. The first priority is digital inclusion. While we all knew that digital inclusion work is critical in ensuring the success of our residents in school, work, and life, the sudden onset of COVID-19 brought this need clearly to the national stage. And we also know that libraries need funding to adapt services and programs to provide safe environments, not only for patrons, but for staff, and to still provide the quality service to patrons. And there's also a need for supporting library services due to community needs. This is broader in nature, but we're looking to see new services that will benefit the community. And as always, if you have partners with tribal communities and museums, we encourage you to work with them if they're positioned to do so. And so because digital inclusion is our first priority, we want to make sure that when we're discussing digital inclusion, we're all on the same page. And so Abi is going to introduce digital inclusion now.
Thanks, Catherine. I love to talk about digital inclusion and all the specific terms and what they mean. And so this is something I like to do. And I like to start with the digital divide, which refers to the gap between those who have access to technology, the internet, and digital literacy training, and those that don't. So the digital divide is the issue that we're addressing. And digital equity is the goal. It's the condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. And it is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential resources. So that is why digital equity is so important. I think we all feel that it is important, but it's good to be able to articulate that those are some of the results of digital equity. And there are three things really that are required for digital equity. And these are sometimes called the three-legged stool, and the three legs are access to a device, access to the internet, and then the skills to use those two. To drill down a little into access to the internet, there's really two issues that are part of that. And the first is availability, which we measure by internet coverage, by internet service providers and mobile coverage, as well as the quality of the internet that is available for people to choose to adopt. And then the second is adoption, which is measured by the number of households that subscribe to and use the different kinds of internet technologies. And both of those are very important to digital equity, but we often in libraries are more involved in the adoption and getting people the direct access to the internet rather than extending the coverage of the internet service providers. Although there are opportunities in both. So the common barriers to broadband adoption are overwhelmingly, we hear that cost is the reason that people don't adopt internet if it is available in their area. But we do hear that access is kind of a secondary high indicator of why people don't adopt internet at home. But there's also a need for the digital skills, the digital literacy to be able to use that internet if you were going to adopt it. And then we're seeing less and less relevancy is an issue. People are seeing obviously now, especially with COVID, that there are a lot of benefits to anybody's life having that. But these are the four main factors we hear, and often it's a combination. So if someone says they don't feel that they have the skills they need to use the internet, there's also often the cost may also be an issue for them. And that's a reason they're not prioritizing it is because of their skills, but the cost is still a barrier for them. So digital inclusion refers to the activities that are necessary to ensure everyone has access to and use of information and communication technologies. So the work that we do is the digital inclusion part. And it is what we have to do to ensure that everyone, including the most disadvantaged, have access to these technologies. It has to evolve as technology advances. So a lot of times with digital inclusion, we focus on basic skills and basic digital literacy. And that is really important, and that's where it all begins. But it can also include emerging tech and different kinds of new technologies. And this is a part of the reason that we say digital inclusion will be something that we will be doing forever, because the technology will continue to evolve, so people will continue to need help accessing that technology and learning how to use it. And digital inclusion work requires intentional strategies and investments to reduce and eliminate the barriers. So that's something that we're going to talk a lot about today, is how we can be intentional with the strategies that we are using for our digital inclusion projects. And as you're kind of designing your what you're applying for this grant, and making sure that those are intentional investments that are going to reduce the barriers in your community. So 5 pieces of digital inclusion: robust, affordable internet coverage or internet access for households, devices that meet the user's needs, digital literacy training to have the skills to use the internet and the device that you do have access to, quality technical support to make sure that the internet and the device keep working, and accessible online content that is usable to people of all different digital skills, of speaking different languages and other accessibility issues. So digital literacy is a big piece of this that we have mentioned throughout, and it is the ability to use the information and communication technologies to find, create, evaluate, and communicate information, which really speaks, I think, to the mission of libraries. And it requires both cognitive and technical skills. So both the technical skills to be able to use a mouse and operate a keyboard or whatever technology you have, as well as the cognitive skills that we often talk about for information literacy and evaluating that information that you find online. And these are the long, sort of long 5 descriptions of the parts of being a digital literate person. And they are too long maybe for me to read, but I did highlight in bold the sections that I think really are common in libraries and part of library missions, which just goes to show that digital literacy is important to libraries and the work that libraries do, especially as we provide online content and expose people to the internet, hopefully through different access points. So we want to make sure that we are providing the digital literacy piece as well. Back over to you, Catherine.
So I do just want to let folks know that for projects that currently fit within our spending priorities, we are allowing for the continuation and expansion of projects funded through SLNC Cares, other LSTA projects, and the NC Student Connect project, which includes the Park and Learn spots. And these were projects that were issued over the past year. I think the Park and Learns were put in the winter of this past year. So if that fits with the work that you are currently doing in your communities, this will allow for you to expand upon those efforts. Next slide. So we have modeled our SLNC Adapts grants off of our traditional LSTA program with EZ and project grants. So both EZ and project grants do not require any matching funds. And we are thrilled to be able to offer an opportunity of this magnitude to North Carolina's libraries. EZ grants are smaller grants with awards up to $25,000. And while partners aren't required, they are encouraged. We find that sometimes that having partners helps to ensure sustainability once grant funding ends. So that's just something to keep in mind. And with the larger project grants, we are requiring a partner, but the award is for up to $100,000. And so a partner is defined as a library or a non-library entity that will contribute specific deliverables to a project in a new or expanded way than has previously occurred with the partner. Friends groups or county departments that are already supporting the library do not meet this definition of a partner, but just as you're working through potential partners, they can include other libraries if you wanted to work with a neighbor. Museums would be an eligible partner, tribes, schools, digital inclusion organizations within your region or community, and other public or private entities. And I did see a question in the chat talking about partners. The library, an eligible library would have to be the applicant, and the museum would be the partner. Next slide. So I want to mention some common expenses that we anticipate to see, and this list is by no means exhaustive. And there's a longer list on the SLNC Adapts page, but also on the last bullet point is it says 2 CFR 200. This is the federal guidance for grants, and it includes allowable and unallowable cost principles in it. So it might not be the most exciting read, but it is a very informative read. And so Salaries for temporary staff who are working on the project, or salary for temporary staff to cover the duties of an existing full-time staff person would be an allowable cost, as well as additional hours for part-time staff. Those are both allowable. One thing I like to remind people is that if you're having staff work on a project, we are all working at capacity, so something has to give. Are you willing to accept that you might lose a program or service in order to offer that? If you are, then great. But if not, you might want to consider hiring a temporary staff person. So consulting and contractual services are allowable costs. Just an example, this could be a cost for paying for a digital literacy trainer. Technology, that includes hardware and software. And the software kind of leads us into subscriptions and the recurring service fees. Sometimes the licenses for the software that we use are annual licenses. And then there's also data plans. With digital inclusion, we have to have access. If that's for hotspots, the data service fees for hotspots are allowable costs. And then there's also travel and training for staff. We want to make sure that staff is able to use the technology that is being purchased, and that they have the skills that are needed to be able to provide digital literacy training. So travel and training is allowable. And also indirect costs, which is also called facility and administration costs, F&A. And these represent the expenses of doing business that are not readily identifiable within the grant, but are necessary for the general operation of the organization. We very commonly see these indirect costs associated with our academic libraries. They very commonly have negotiated federal rates with a federal agency. That's when we see them. If you have questions about indirect costs, I'm happy to have a conversation with you later. Next slide. And this is just my friendly reminder to the public libraries. If you are using LSTA funds to purchase devices used to access the internet or to pay for direct costs associated with accessing the internet, the Children's Internet Protection Act does apply, and you must be compliant with it. Next slide. So I did just want to talk about some common unallowable costs that we see. Again, not exhaustive. There's more information on the SLNC Adapts page. Again, more information in the uniform guidance. But construction is not allowable with any LSTA funds, which includes the SLNC Adapts grants. So this would include last mile work for those infrastructure projects. While the equipment is likely to be allowable, the process of installing it would not be allowable. So the burying of fiber, the burying of cable, pouring of concrete pads, anything that involves big construction equipment, that is all unallowable and would be expected to be paid with outside of the grant, which is nice because the grant doesn't require any matching funds. So that can be a totally separate piece and is not part of the LSTA project. So gifts and incentives, refreshments and entertainment, those are all unallowable costs. While incentives have, especially in just thinking about summer reading, since it's that time of year, we know that incentives help to help bring kids in and to help them prevent from, the summer loss, but those are unallowable costs. Pre and post water costs, sorry, those words stuck together. This in particular applies to those subscriptions and recurring service costs. So if you have a data plan that goes past the grant period, that would not be allowable. We would have to prorate those costs. Just remember, we want to keep all costs associated with the grant within the grant period. So that is what pre and post award costs are. And then we don't pay for salaries for existing full-time staff. So, but again, you can hire temporary staff or you can increase hours for part-time staff. That is allowable. Next slide. And so I did just want to briefly touch base on this. This is a new section within the uniform guidance that was added this past fall. Grantees are prohibited from purchasing from specific vendors, and they are, it's Hawaii Telecommunications, ZTE Corp, Hytera Communications, Hangs Out Digital, and Dow Technology. And these companies that were prohibited from purchasing from include any subsidiaries or affiliates of these companies. I think the full scope of these companies' range is unknown, but luckily for us, there is a way for us to search for entities that are that we're prohibited from purchasing from, and that is through the System for Award Management, which is sam.gov, and you can search for excluded parties. So for instance, if you search for Hawaii, about 4 entities pop up. But if you search for an entity like Verizon or T-Mobile, those parties are not excluded. So just to do, as you're working through your project and you are identifying telecommunications supplies that you want to purchase, just be sure to search for those entities within this database to ensure that you are being compliant. Next slide. And so I did want to talk about our criteria. Reviewers do use a rubric. And I just want to remind you that first priority will be given to applications that are focusing on digital inclusion efforts in high need communities. And then as funds allow, the projects to address the spending priorities 2 and 3 will be considered in that order. Next slide. So on this slide, you'll see I put a number in parentheses at the end of each bullet. And this number just correlates to the section of the criteria that applies in the application template. So earlier we talked about identifying the high need communities. And in your application, you will be scored on how you've identified that community in section 2. So you can see 2 is in the parentheses. So section 2 is the user and needs section. That means we expect to see the data included in the application to inform the reviewer on who the funds will impact. A well-defined user and needs section leads right into the project description and how it will help the reviewer understand the benefit and how your project will help the user. We'll also look for details within the project description on the goals and the activities of the project, and this correlates with the timeline also. Reviewers will also be looking at your evaluation methodology. This is for your outputs and outcomes. And then finally, is the budget reasonable, necessary, and allowable? This is something that we will be looking at, those unallowable costs. And if they're in the budget, then the score in your rubric will be lower based off of those costs. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're working through designing your project, what is allowable and what is not. And over to you, Abby.
Thanks. So I just thought it would be good for us to talk a little bit about what digital inclusion already looks like in libraries often, and think about how we can make those efforts more impactful and maybe adapt them to fit how needs have changed during COVID and just as time has gone on. So computer labs in libraries, often libraries were the first places with a public access computer in a community. And so that is an example I love to tell people outside of libraries about how libraries are the digital inclusion, kind of the original digital inclusion people. And they continue, I know, to be important in your communities. And some of those have become device lending, when people need a device for longer than the hours that you have, or they would prefer to use it in their own home, or when there's a pandemic, then sometimes the device lending is more helpful than the computer labs. And then internet access, the same as with the computer labs, libraries were often the first place where you could just access the internet and get free Wi-Fi. And hotspot lending has sort of been an evolution of that as time has gone on. And then the third piece, the digital literacy instruction, both formal as far as classes on computers and different kinds of software, things you can do on a computer, and informal when people are using your computer labs and they need help resetting their password or setting up an email account. We often find libraries are doing that sort of informal digital literacy instruction. And those three also follow the three things that are necessary for digital equity. So in those ways, libraries are already working in those fields often. But I would encourage you to think about how you could make these mesh together and make sure that you are addressing all three needs for people who are using any of them. So if someone is coming to use the computer lab, it's likely that they may not have internet access elsewhere. So thinking about how you can kind of make those fit together and then make sure that people are getting the digital literacy instruction they need. And I would like to show you a few examples of programs that are doing this. And they are, a few of them are not in libraries. And part of that is because I thought it might be good to get outside of our kind of silos and see what some other people are doing. But also, if you attended the Fiber Fridays recently, we heard from some great library projects in North Carolina, and you can see those in the SLNC Niche Academy. You can review that, and I think we have a link for that later. But you can also see on the CARES page some of the projects that came out of the SLNC CARES grant program that are also great examples of this. So I wanted to remind that those are there since I'm not featuring those same projects today. But I am starting with my own project, which is the work that I have done, Catherine referenced earlier, a IMLS grant that we received to develop a holistic digital inclusion model a couple of years ago, and we are still working on that. And many times you may have heard it referred to as the Homework Gap Project. And in that program, we worked with K-12 families. So that is what the Homework Gap refers to. K-12 students who don't have access at home to the internet and devices they need to do their homework, which we've all seen develop over the last year into a more acute problem. So in that program, when we were meeting in person, this is the model that we formed. We worked with the schools to make sure that students who had one-to-one devices at school were able to take them home. And those were the students that were involved in our program. Students that were taking home a one-to-one device from the school and did not have internet access at home. But we were working with the schools to make sure that the parents as well as the students would be able to use that device so that the whole family would have access to a device at home. And then the libraries lent a mobile hotspot to those families who, again, did not have internet access at home otherwise. And that enabled the student to access their homework at home. And it also introduced those resources to the entire family and to the parents and caregivers of those students. So we matched those with family digital literacy workshops that the libraries taught in partnership with the schools in order to make sure that the families had the skills they needed to use those things that we had kind of introduced into their homes. And the students got instruction on things like online safety and digital citizenship, while the caregivers often learned more basic digital skills or how to do things like healthcare online that they maybe have not been doing online before. So that is just a demonstration of the three pieces kind of going together to make sure that the entire digital inclusion topics were covered, all three of them. So if you're interested in that, there is a toolkit available on our website that both has the digital literacy curriculum that we used, as well as a program development guide that you can use to figure out who your partners would be in your community, how that would work, and design a solution that would work best for your community. And if it is the homework gap that you're addressing, the K-12 students and their families, the curriculum is very useful, but even if you're not, the program development guide can kind of walk you through the process of doing a holistic digital inclusion project and making sure that all aspects are included. And I will just remind you that in that program, the library did not provide the device. They had a partner that provided the device. So when I am telling you that you need to do holistic solutions, I'm not necessarily saying you need to do all of the parts of it. But if you can find partners who can provide the things that you're not providing and make sure that the people that you're working with and your target audience has multiple resources for the different problems or needs that they have, then that is a more holistic solution. And as we are developing this model for the change in the times and the more remote aspects of many programs now and doing things online, we have added digital navigators to that program, which are individuals that support participants or digital literacy learners through the entire digital inclusion process. And they do that one-on-one. So in the Homework Gap project, as it has moved on, the participants who are attending the trainings also have access to somebody that can call for help in between meetings and when they have personalized goals that they want to reach that aren't relevant to maybe the coursework or the entire group, they can still get help with those. Digital Navigators is really a new term, but it describes work that libraries have already been doing and a lot of people have been doing to provide really that one-on-one assistance like you might give in a computer lab or during a book librarian appointment. And it really models very similar to a reference interview. So if you are aware of the different things that a person would need to kind of bridge the digital divide for their household, the internet access, the device access, and the digital skills, and you're also aware of the resources that would be available to them, then you would be prepared to talk a person through that process and see what their goals are and how you can help them meet that. If you want to learn more about that model, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance has sort of began that conversation and has collected a lot of the resources that you might use to start a program like that, either as a part of another digital inclusion project or kind of as your main work. And it can kind of scale up and down depending on what your needs are for your community. Moving on a bit from the K-12 population, which I think is really important and has gotten a lot of attention in the last year, I wanted to just bring up two other target populations and two projects that have happened in North Carolina. Digital Charlotte is a digital inclusion organization, and obviously they are specific in the Charlotte area. And they've done quite a few different projects for different populations, doing train-the-trainer models so that their participants who learn digital literacy can teach that in the future, kind of to create that sustainable solution. But I did want to bring up this specific project where they helped residents of correctional facilities prepare to be in the workforce and search for jobs. And they did this by providing computers that the participants would keep at the end of the program. And then they learned the skills that they needed, the digital skills on those same devices, because we know sometimes new computer users have trouble switching from one kind of a device to another device. So they learned on the devices they were keeping, and then they built resumes, bookmarked websites, and saved all those files on that computer that they got to keep at the end. And so they earned that device by completing the program, and those were donated by a computer refurbisher nearby there. And so they had the device that they needed and the skills that they needed and to re-enter the workforce. So when they rejoined the community they're from, that they would be prepared for that and on a path to success in that way. And they also have now, Digital Charlotte has digital navigators that they could reach out to get the internet access when they get to that point. Another high need and sort of difficult to reach community are farm workers in North Carolina. And the North Carolina Farm Workers Health Program is really focused on, as is in their name, the health of those populations. And that includes, especially for people who are living a bit more remotely, that often includes internet access and digital skills for telehealth and to be able to find those resources that you need online. So they have worked to do some single payer agreements, for example, in group living situations to make sure that internet access is available in places where a hotspot may not work because of it, because of mobile coverage. So they're trying to get that wireline connection, which is a bit more reliable, and then provide devices and skills training for those groups so they can access the healthcare that's available to them online. Just a few quick tips, maybe too many quick tips for one slide, but just some things that we have learned and seen in other programs that have been effective in providing digital equity and digital inclusion work. As I have already said many times, we really believe in holistic solutions. And as I said, that can be through partnerships, but making sure that people who are gaining, for example, digital skills are able to use those digital skills with access to the internet and devices. They come from trusted community institutions and organizations, which may be the library, but if you are targeting a population that you've not been successful in building trust with in the past, that can be something that a partner can help you with. So if you find a partner that works with that group, that can help you get that trust. It's really important. And leveraging partnerships, I've already said that that's helpful for all of these steps. I think that solutions that work for the whole household are really important. So as we said in the Homework Gap project, we were making sure that if we were sending internet home to the family, we were doing everything we could to make sure that would work for the entire family and not that one person in the family could use it and it wouldn't be sufficient for the entire family. It meets sort of the social needs for learners. We've heard that a community of learners who are learning together, that discussion is really important between them and their support of one another. But that can also be individual help, like with a digital navigator who can kind of add a personal touch and answer questions at the speed and relevant to the individual you're working with. The program should be culturally and linguistically accessible to the populations that you're working with. And they should teach sufficient lifelong learning skills as technology evolves. So the goal of the final step of the digital literate person is that they are self-sufficient and they can continue to learn about technology as it learns, but also use technology to learn as the technology evolves. And they should fit the mission and strategic plan of the organization. One resource that is accessible through some links on the next slide is the Digital Inclusion Plan template from the Broadband Infrastructure Office. And if your community does not already have a digital inclusion plan, that can be a way to make sure that it fits the plan of your community. I think that digital inclusion fits the mission of most libraries, and that's not difficult, but having a strategic plan is really important. And last, it builds on the best practices and existing resources because there are so many of them. There's really no need to reinvent the wheel when it's unnecessary. So I have provided 2 links here, and we'll be sure to share these slides once we get done here. But the first is a bit.ly that goes to the state library's website where we have listed some digital inclusion resources, including that planning resource, that digital inclusion plan template that I mentioned, as well as some curriculum that are relevant to different populations online. The resource we link to for the K-12 is our own homework gap curriculum, but if you are seeking to reach a different population, you may be able to find a different curriculum resource there. And I also want to point out on Niche Academy, there's a digital inclusion category where you can see the recording that I mentioned earlier that covers some great projects that are shared about what's going on in North Carolina libraries, as well as some more background on digital inclusion and broadband access in North Carolina. So those resources are available.
Okay, so like Abby mentioned, we will, she does have resources in SLNC Academy, and there's also training related to grant writing, and I hope you'll log on and take a look at those offerings if you're interested in learning more, or even just a refresher about grant writing. And I was briefly kicked out of this Zoom, so it might have been answered, but I did see a question about, is this recording going to be shared? Yes, it will be put into SLNC Academy for you to log in and to view again. And then, as Abby mentioned earlier, you can look at the SLNC Cares abstracts that we funded within this past year. And then I wanted to let you know about the LSTA program report database, and that is maintained by IMLS. And this is the database that LSTA coordinators like me use to enter the projects that are funded every year within their states. And so you can search other projects, not only in North Carolina, but across the nation. But the only caveat with this database is that it only includes completed projects. And so the most recent data that is available is through the federal fiscal year of 2019. So this morning I searched for COVID-19. Some things do pop up because that it was the tail end of federal fiscal year 2019. So you may find some things within the SPR, but for sure there are other digital inclusion projects that libraries are doing across the nation, even that were done outside of the need that has been demonstrated through the pandemic. And then also you can search the awards issued by IMLS through their discretionary CARES grant. So there is a North Carolina Libraries awarded, so you can search that database for more information. Next slide. So I did just want to walk you through the next steps of what to do now that you've learned about this opportunity. And so you're going to want to look at the instructions, and it's going to walk you through what you need in the application. It's organized by section, and you can use the instructions to help guide you as you're completing the template form. And that's basically just the skeleton of an application. You can use the Word doc to just to write your application within it. You can save it, and that is your application. And then you'll want to complete the online signature form. And that is an online form. And once you submit the form, you'll receive a PDF in your email. And you can either put that PDF through your own e-signature software solution, or use it to gather physical signatures from your library director and from your authorizing official. A question I get very commonly is, well, I'm the library director and the authorizing official. That is, in my experience, that is never the case. They're not the same person. Common authorizing officials are county managers, board chair, the dean of sponsored programs, the dean of your financial office, someone who is authorized to accept federal funds on the library's behalf. And so you'll attach that signature page to your application as one attachment, and you're going to email it to us by 11:59 on June 15th to lsta@ncdcr.gov. And I'll say it now, late submissions will not be considered. Because if I allow one, then I have to allow them all. And then that's you're opening Pandora's box, and I can't do it. And so just moving forward, we do want to answer your questions. I know there was another question before I got kicked out about pre-reviewing. In our traditional grant program, we do, consultants within the state library do review grants and provide feedback to the applicant. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. I will say that I am available to do that. But just as a note, the closer you get to the deadline, the more likely it is that I may be inundated and I may not get to it in time. So I do want you to reach out to us as you are working on these proposals. Happy to give you feedback. But I will say, if you give me the application on June the 14th, I will not provide feedback for you, but I will try my hardest to provide feedback to you in a timely manner.
And I'll say I will also be glad to provide any assistance I can as far as digital inclusion, and I may be able to point you to similar projects that you might be able to look at or other resources there are. But also maybe not on the last day. Do we have any other questions?
There was initially a question that may benefit the broader group. I know Timothy answered it, but in the chat, but it was, can a non-library entity such as a museum apply with partner libraries, or would a library need to be the applicant?
So a library would need to be the primary applicant, and the museum would be the partner entity, which that would make you eligible, if you hadn't worked with the museum before, would make you eligible for a partner grant or a project grant with a partner. And Timothy did drop the slides in the PDF in the chat, so feel free to go ahead and download that. I will try to email it out also to the folks that registered and weren't able to make it. I know I got a few emails about those. So the project timeline, the grant, if awarded, the grant would start August the 1st of 2021, and the projects would need to be complete by July 31st of 2022. I'm doing my month rhyme. Did I get it right? 31 days in July. And so for issuing awards, we will issue the awards on July the 15th. So it's a quick turnaround time, but not as quick as we did SLNC Cares. So
We have another question that's, can a nonprofit receiving county funds be a partner?
I don't see why not.
Catherine, am I allowed to just say the question out loud or do I need to put it in
Yes,
chat?
go ahead.
Okay. I was wondering, with the broadband, emergency broadband program that's starting on the 12th, if we had an idea to have digital navigators that would go out into the community and help people get signed up for that so they could take advantage of that program. But someone mentioned that there's a concern that by the time we got this project started in August 1st and we hired a person to help people by September or mid-September, that emergency broadband money would be dried up and gone. Do you have any insight on that? Like how much money is going to that emergency broadband or?
I can answer that. Sorry, Catherine, I took over for you.
Thank you. Abby.
And I don't have the number in front of me about the exact amount of money, but I have heard different guesses, and I think that's what they are, because it is a temporary fund that ends either 6 months after the pandemic is officially over or when the money runs out. And the consensus is that the money will likely run out first. And I've heard between 2 months and 9 months, maybe 10 months. And there's also a possibility that it could be extended with more funds. So the short answer is it's really unpredictable. But I would say that depending on how you design that project, there may be other work that digital navigators could do. There are low-cost offers that are available outside of that may be something that they could sort of provide as well. But I do know that there is a need to get that EVB out as soon as possible.
Thank you.
A question about partners. All of our towns support their libraries in one way or another, whether it's direct funding or contribution to the county library system. If we want to work with a town to say put Wi-Fi in a park, and the town's going to provide the electrical connectivity and the installation, would that qualify the town as a partner even though they support the library?
I feel that we have always considered that as a part of a new partnership. Just in work, we see that with story walks sometimes that is considered a partner.
Okay, thank you.
And so I did get a question, can grant funds be used to pay tuition fees for computer skills classes if the library is of that educational institution? So I'm assuming there's a part of the I'm assuming it's a university that will provide the classes, and that it will be to either to library staff or to members in the community. And I think that would be allowable. But you would want to make sure that you're following, because you would be paying that entity within your institution, you would want to make sure that you're following your procurement guidelines.
There was also another question of, can career services and veteran services be a partner at an academic institution?
So these are separate departments within a college. I'm walking through my steps, boxes that I check in my mind.
Hi, Catherine. That's actually my question. And so I'm changing institutions, and one of my big service needs are veteran students and veteran families. And so I'm wanting to know if I can partner with career services and the veteran services at the institution to work on outreach and for our veteran students, if that's an allowable something that's allowable, I guess, with a grant.
Yeah, that would be allowable. And I do think that would be a new partner, because it sounds like you hadn't worked with those populations before. So you would be providing a new program or service to them. So it would be it sounds like it would be a new partnership, but could be expanding what is already there if you're not sure what is currently being done.
I'm pretty sure it's a new partnership, but I just wanted to check.
It sounds like a partnership to me.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for joining today. Again, this was our first information session for a grant opportunity. It is something that I plan to incorporate moving forward, even into our traditional LSTA program. But if you do have questions as you are working on, on your application and designing a project and working with your partners, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Abby is also willing to help with digital inclusion questions. And we're just here to help you, to help your communities, because you're out there on the front lines doing the work. So thank you for everything that you do. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and look forward to seeing you soon.